Hi, fifth grade teachers. My name is Kelly, and today I'm going to walk you through the Civil War unit plan for fifth grade social studies. There are 14 lessons in this plan and should take between 19 and 22 days to complete. There's a unit question map that you can access if you would like to see the breakdown of the unit, as well as a slideshow that helps you move through instruction. In this unit, we're focusing on the compelling question, how could the fight over rights break apart the United States? And we're asking students to explain. In the first chapter, students are going to look at the struggle of two types of rights for African Americans and states' rights, and how that struggle could make people want to fight. We'll hit topics such as enslavement, the transatlantic trade, lack of rights or protections in the Constitution, abolitionists, Underground Railroad, Missouri Compromise of 1850, free versus enslaved states, the Dred Scott decision, connections to westward expansion, and the division of power between federal and state governments. In Chapter 2, we look at how the fight for rights led to the American Civil War. Within this section, we're checking the credibility of sources, analyzing primary and secondary sources, and gathering evidence. Students will compare and contrast the Union and Confederacy, how life was affected for various groups, and 4 specific battles: Bull Run, Antietam, Vicksburg, and Gettysburg. We'll also take a look at the Emancipation Proclamation and the Gettysburg Address. In the final chapter, we're looking at how the Civil War ended. This includes the Reconstruction era, Civil War amendments, sharecropping, and Black codes. Chapter 1 lessons are entitled Give Us Our Rights. These lessons are centered around supporting question 1, what types of rights made people want to fight? We begin lesson 1 by watching a small scene from Encanto where Mirabel and Abuela are fighting. There's a graphic organizer for students to use while they're watching the clip. You may have to watch the clip a couple of times to get all the information. Following that, discuss some of the items from the graphic organizer and from what was noticed in the clip. This is the point where you share the compelling question, have students pull out the information that social scientists would want to know, then show supporting question 1 and give students time to brainstorm. Lesson 2, we are using some aspects of an iCivics lesson called Slavery, No Freedom, No Rights. Now, the correct terminology is enslavement, not slavery, so you'll want to point that out to students. We'll also want to use the word enslaved person rather than slave, and enslaver rather than slave owner. Students would read this information called For Sale, Human Beings to find out a bit about enslavement and what happened to enslaved people. The transatlantic trade is mentioned, and here is an image that you can look at to see the items and enslaved people that were brought between the different areas. This is also known as the triangular trade. Here's another image of it. And then you could also take a look at this time-lapse video that represents the number of people brought over and were forced into enslavement in North America, South America, and the Caribbean. Talk about the conditions of enslavement and the fact that these people had no legal rights. You can talk about legal actions, reminding students about the Constitution, and taking a look at the enslaved population chart from 1790 to 1850. A dashed line shows a state that either wasn't a state at that time or no longer allowed enslavement in their borders. In lesson 3, we continue on with the iCivics lesson and read How Was Slavery Defended? Students will complete section A of the worksheet called They Really Believe That to understand some of the pro-slavery thinking that was present at that time. This can prompt into a discussion about actions that people took to try and end enslavement, particularly our abolitionists, and continue that learning into the Underground Railroad. We also have information about the freed population prior to the Civil War. In lesson 4, we use the iCivics lesson, Slave States, Free States, and we focus on westward expansion and how people moving west meant that more states were added, and those states were either ones that allowed enslavement or did not. We had various compromises, the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850, that were trying to maintain a balance. Just for your information, some of the topics covered in the Chapter 1 lessons are introduced in 3rd grade social studies. Students will have heard about the Underground Railroad, a bit about enslavement, the triangular trade, and a couple of the other events that started leading up to the Civil War. In Lesson 5, we look at federal versus state power so that we can understand this concept of states' rights and how states wanted to be able to have the ability to make laws about enslavement since the Constitution did not outright ban it. Chapter 1 ends with a formative assessment of a quick response to supporting question 1. Chapter 2 lessons are called The War Between the States and focuses on supporting question 2, what happened after the United States broke apart. So here's where we're learning about the Civil War. Lesson 6, we review the compelling question, display supporting question 2, and then move into the Civil War iCivics lesson. This lesson is a bit lengthy, so pay attention to the highlighted items in the lesson plan to know which sections need to be completed. In Lesson 7, we are going to focus on the strengths and weaknesses of the Union and Confederacy by using different resources. And before moving into that, we're going to review how to evaluate sources. There are a few resources available that help you teach a mini lesson about credibility of resources, or you can use any sources that you're using for your literacy class. Practice determining source credibility while learning about Fort Sumter, which was the first official battle of the Civil War. On the Union versus Confederacy worksheet, this is where students will capture information about the battles and figure out if the sources are credible. This continues on with maps about which states were part of the Union and which were the Confederacy. You also have some learning on border states. Activity C from the Civil War iCivics lesson lets you take a look at the locations of the capitals for the Confederacy and the Union. It's pretty interesting that they're only 119 miles apart using today's roads. Lesson 8, we're learning about life during the Civil War. And to do this, we have a worksheet that goes along with it. And there are a collection of resources available to learn about the different topics. Some are highlighted, and those are the ones that are most recommended to use, as they include primary sources, as well as some secondary information. Lesson 9, we're going to learn about Antietam and emancipation. We start by looking at the record of battles in 1861 through the summer of 1862. It gives students time to make observations, including who appears to be winning at this point. Explain that Lincoln and the Union armies are getting frustrated and they need something to change in order to start preserving the Union. The Battle of Antietam seems to be this item, and students can take a look at the maps of different aspects of the Battle of Antietam and make comparisons between the primary source and one of the secondary source maps. Then we move into the Emancipation Proclamation. Read about the Emancipation Proclamation and discuss that Lincoln's original goal for the war, which is simply to put the Union back together, gets switched with this proclamation. Lincoln has to wait until after Antietam before he can enact the proclamation because he needed the Union to appear to be winning the war rather than the Confederacy. In Lesson 10, we learn about Vicksburg and Gettysburg. Vicksburg was a major battle in 1863, and there's a variety of resources to use to learn more about that siege. It is one of the westernmost battles and is happening along the Mississippi River, which goes along with part of the strategy the Union had for trying to limit the South's access for resources. Gettysburg happened around the same time as Vicksburg, and there's some informational resources here to use to learn about Gettysburg. We'll also want to take a look at the Gettysburg Address and discover its meaning. Make sure that students understand the basic message of the Gettysburg Address, but do not feel the need to go very far in depth, as students will learn about this again in 8th grade. Chapter 3 is called Fixing What Was Broken and goes along with supporting question 3, what happened when the fighting ended? In Lesson 11, we talk about the end of the war. So we do a quick reminder on Gettysburg and explain that there was about one more year of fighting with mostly Union victories. Then we learn a bit about Robert E. Lee's surrender. Then you can spend a little bit of time on President Lincoln's assassination, why it happened, and what it meant for the country. Again, don't spend a ton of time on this topic or give too many details, as this is something that is hit again in 8th grade social studies. Lesson 12, we touch on Reconstruction, again, a topic hit again in 8th grade social studies. We have the Civil War iCivics lesson, and you can read Ending the War, Ending Slavery, and Reconstructing a Nation. Spend some time on the what if activity to discuss some of the different plans government officials had for Reconstruction. Then take a look at changing the Constitution and the Civil War amendments. Make sure that students can answer the question, what was the overall goal of Reconstruction? Lesson 13 is about the pros and cons. We're going to take a look at Reconstruction in the South and see how people reacted to things such as sharecropping, carpetbaggers, and overall resistance to Reconstruction. We also have a bit of information about Black power during Reconstruction, which includes topics such as Black codes and voting rights. And then we also talk a bit about how violence increased against Blacks during this period, especially in the South. We get the Great Migration, when many Black people moved to the North. Students learned about this in 3rd grade, by the way. And we also have some information about Jim Crow laws. Lesson 14 is the summative, in which students create a response to the compelling question. The current summative requires a paragraph for each of the sections of the unit. I hope this video was a helpful resource as you prepare to teach about the Civil War. Please reach out to your PLC leader, instructional coach, or curriculum facilitator if you have any questions or are in need of any additional support.